Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everyone. When I say this word, right away, it conjures up an image. The word is grief. When somebody's grieving, right away you think of the passing of usually a loved one. But it's not always just that. It could be the loss of a job, loss of another type of relationship. The person is still here, but let's say it's a divorce, the relationship ended. Many different aspects of grief. How do you navigate through that? And I'm intrigued to hear that it's the opposite of attachment, or it's connected to attachment. So we're going to bring him back in here and pick up where we left off last week. And that was talking about attachment. He is an amazing psychotherapist, helps people all over the world, as a matter of fact, virtually. Dr. Barry Pilson is back with us. Hi, Barry. How you doing?
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me back. And hopefully we'll get into a little bit of a different aspect of grief. And that is what you already alluded to, which is the idea of separation and using the grief model as a way to understand a process of separation, which is important in terms of our human interpersonal relationships, period. You know, we attach and we separate, we attach and we separate. And grief as a model or as an explanation is a good way to describe separation. And further, which we want to talk about in a positive way. So it's not just, oh, it's a loss, oh, that's terrible, but as a process of acceptance as we move on, which is related to the stages of grief, which a lot of people are familiar with.
And let's get to those in a moment, but I want to go back to the attachment connection to grief. Is it the opposite, or is it connected to grief, the word attachment? And how does it apply?
Well, attachment is, again, you know, how we is a description of connecting to people. And what we talked about last time is we all have, to a certain degree, different attachment styles. We might have an anxious attachment where we kind of are afraid that somebody's going to detach from us. We might have a sort of disorganized attachment where we kind of glom onto somebody and then we react to that by distancing ourselves. So there's kind of a push-pull reaction that happens in attachment styles. And when people get together, a lot of times they might have different attachment styles, and that sometimes is difficult to identify because one may interpret somebody's attachment style as clingy. Another person may interpret that as they're distant. So it becomes a difficult dynamic there. So that's basically what attachment is. I hope that makes sense.
Is it, I think intuitively here, let's say, and we'll use an example of the passing of a loved one. Is it that obviously you were attached to them? You were attached to them
Right.
emotionally. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, to a certain degree we are. I want to nuance that a little bit. But yes, I mean, if you're attached to a loved one and they die, obviously we're separated from them, right?
Yes.
And we're separated in a way that we have no choice because they're gone. They're gone. And so emotionally, you might go through different stages of that grief process, whereby people do hang on to the feelings, to the memory, to the narratives, to the stories. I mean, we all have stories of people who we were attached to, who might have died, and that we talk about. So there is that sort of attachment, but that separation is pretty clear. The person is not here anymore.
Sure.
Okay. Now, what I'm also talking about is with somebody who you're actively involved with, or that hasn't died, but that we may need to separate from them in terms of the degree of attachment, which may be toxic to a certain degree. Okay, that our attachment to them is causing conflict, causing distress, is unhealthy, etc. So the nuance of that is to separate from them also involves a grief process. So it's not as clear that, okay, the person's already gone and therefore we're separated, but we may need to separate from them via a grief process, you see. And, so anyway, that's the basic premise of that.
Can we go through the stages of grief?
Yeah, so the stages of grief have been pretty well established in the literature for many years. The classic person who talked about that is named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who talked about a classic book called Death and Dying, where she identified the stages of grief. The good news, not the good news, but the news about that is those stages of grief have pretty much held up as a model of understanding how people separate. And the stages briefly are denial, where you're kind of shocked and don't really see or feel the loss of somebody. The first emotion that sort of occurs after the denial process is anger a lot of times. In other words, we experience the loss, they're not there. And you see, I'm not at hurt yet. I'm still, the first emotion usually is anger. Then, you may go through a process, especially if a person is slowly leaving you in a ongoing grief process of bargaining. Okay. And in terms of separation, this is a real important stage if you're trying to separate from somebody or change your relationship with them. And changing the relationship may mean that you're separating not just from them as a person, but from certain processes with them. You see, so what you'll do, and what everybody does, is you may be angry. Something happened. You may be angry, and then you want to discuss what you're upset with. So often in discussing something, the two of you will bargain about something, kind of play, let's make a deal. All right.
Even though I have to believe, even though it may not be real, like, some say, made a deal with God, just
right.
hypothetical. If they hang on, another year, I'll do this. I promise I'll do that type of thing.
Exactly. And more earthly to make a bargain or make a deal with somebody that you're trying to make a relationship work with. Okay. So let's make a deal, we'll okay. Like, instead of talking every day to each other, let's talk 3 times a week. Okay. So that we're not necessarily, the clinginess or the connectedness is not so intense. That might be playing, let's make a deal. Sometimes that works, and sometimes you get into an appropriate type of separation and life goes on. But a lot of times that doesn't work for a variety of reasons. Now, what will happen is what you kind of alluded to when you bargain and you play let's make a deal. What you'll tend to do is focus on the deal and kind of circle back into the first stage of the grief, which is a denial. So now that I've made a deal, okay, problem solved in my mind. And now we're back into our relationship. And if things were not really working very well, then we'll tend to live in denial for a while, you see? So the problem with the bargaining is that in a way it can be helpful, but in a way it also can keep you stuck. All right, because now you have to work through the denial again, whereby when a crisis or a difficulty occurs, you get angry, and then you're back to either let's make a deal, let's bargain, or if you're done with the bargaining, then sometimes you will move into the next stage of grief, which is the sadness. So now, okay, this is a change. I want to change, but it's still difficult to let go of something or to feel a loss, all right? But the understanding of the grief process is, unless you go through the anger and the sadness, then, sort of experience both emotions. The anger, this happens a lot, when you talk about breaking up with somebody. Well, I'm real angry at him. I'm real angry at her. Then you, after you're done with the anger, a lot of times you feel, oh my God, I'm going to really miss him. I'm going to really miss her. You go through some sadness, okay? And unless you kind of go through both of those emotions, then you're more open to move into acceptance. And acceptance is the real key to making a change. Once it's not a 1, 2, 3, but I move into acceptance, then I'm no longer bargaining. I'm no longer stuck. This is reality. Now, where do I go from here?
I want to ask at this point, anger.
Yeah.
Is anger really anger? What do I mean by that? And I've debated this with friends, and it's gone around, a number of times,
Yeah.
and friends of all different backgrounds, that anger, some believe anger is not really anger. It's really other emotions that
Yeah.
present themselves in an angry type way. But anger isn't really an emotion unto itself. What are your thoughts?
Well, we've talked a little bit about that in the past too, Steve. Yeah, anger is kind of a reaction, okay?
Hmm.
And the thing is anger is the great cover-up emotion. On the one hand, it protects us. We get angry, it energizes us. We have adrenaline pumping. We're more aware. We feel it. We feel powerful sometimes when we're angry. Uh, on
Hmm.
the other hand, anger is the great cover up too. It's
Yeah.
easier to feel angry than it is, for instance, to feel sad, what we're talking about now. It's easier to feel angry than it is to feel ashamed. It's easier to feel angry than it is to feel guilt. So anger is kind of a deceptive emotion, really. You
Yeah.
know, um,
Hmm. I never
and
thought of it in that way, that
ideally,
that I'm sorry,
yeah,
that is a cover up, that it's a cover up for other
yeah,
things. Interesting.
yeah. And if you're going to really try to work through somebody with some, work through something with somebody, you have to get underneath the anger. All right. What are you hurt? Not, oh, you shouldn't be hurt, but tell me about the hurt. All right. Are you ashamed? Okay, tell me about that. So that's the dynamic that where anger can really get you stuck. All right. So anyway, the idea then is, if you can get through the anger, get, like in this case, to the sadness, to the hurt, to the loneliness, then you're more open to moving into the acceptance of what's happening. And that opens you up. Actually, the good news about acceptance is I'm no longer trying to control, change the other person, or even my dynamic with them in terms of our attachment. I see it for what it is, and I accept that and I'm okay with that. Okay. For instance, this person who's trying to cling to me, instead of seeing that, oh, that's a negative thing, I can accept that from that person. It doesn't have to necessarily change our dynamics, but if I don't accept that, I'm gonna instead be pushing them away all the time, and that kind of push pull process is not healthy either. So if I accept the person, also what I get is a sense of empowerment myself. All right.
Hmm.
That's really the issue that I wanted to get to with acceptance. So the separation, is actually a way to empower yourself as you navigate relationships.
What are some of the things that we shouldn't say to somebody who's grieving? For example, I know how you feel. I could imagine how you
Yeah,
feel. How do
yeah.
we, as somebody that's trying to offer support to somebody who may be grieving a situation, what are some of the things that we should say or we shouldn't say?
Yeah, I mean that's a real good question, and I wish I had a magical answer for that. That this is guaranteed. Uh, to be honest, most people, when somebody, especially that's been close to you, dies, and most people are trying to comfort, they really don't know. They kind of avoid you. Okay, they may say, "I'm here for you," you know,
Hmm.
but they kind of avoid you. Now, the other side of that sometimes is they'll call. You maybe haven't heard from them in a long time. They'll call and say, hey, I heard about what happened. I'm really sorry, but I'm here for you,
Yeah.
Um, I think, you can't really say to somebody, I know what you're going through, because you really don't,
Right.
first of all.
And even if you
You
had the
know,
passing of the same type of person in your life, you're not them.
yes, right,
Yeah.
right, right. But you can say, look, the only thing I can say is loss is a big deal. I've
Mm.
had some significant ones. I've had some not significant ones. It's hard, and instead of trying to fix them, that's the issue. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to come up with some solution for them. You know, but it's important to validate. The what's happened as well. Um,
Mm.
it
Yeah.
doesn't do any good to avoid it.
How
So I wish I
long?
had a I wish I had a magical word. I really
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. But I guess it's a moving target. Every situation is
Yeah,
different. Um,
right.
and this question comes under that category, but how long does it take to grieve? Let's say, and everybody's different. I get that. But based on your experience, your feelings, where somebody's spouse, let's say, suddenly passed away,
Yeah,
time has to go on. You have to heal. You have to go through the process. How long could that take? I've heard in that situation, could be 4 years, maybe even 5 years in a situation like that.
well, and maybe longer. Quite honestly,
Yeah.
you could talk about a loss of a spouse, that had tremendously significant, uh, you know, time in your life, and you know 5 and 10 years later, it's not that you're living in that moment still with the person, okay, but when you think about them, when you remember them, when you will feel grief, you will feel the loss. Now that is a healthy thing to feel, okay, uh, because what you're doing is you're honoring them, and you're honoring yourself. You're honoring that relationship was meaningful to you. Okay.
Mm.
So it's not something you just get over. All right. However, in terms of the acute kind of reaction that you're talking about, where, am I immobile? Am I unable to move into another direction in life? That so much depends on where we're at, period. Um,
And
you know,
everybody
the
internalizes things differently.
That's right.
It's
Everybody internalizes differently, and your life might be very different. You might be in a stage of life. You lose a spouse when you're 80. How much change are you going to really make in your life? I mean, you might make some. I'm not saying that, but how much are you going to make? So it varies. Anyway, the quick short answer is, if you're still acutely grieving 1 to 2 years later, that's a long time, and you
mm,
probably should seek out some kind of help. When I say help, at least somebody to talk to
yeah.
about it. That's a little more objective. Uh,
And is that known? Would that be? I guess it would be like a PTSD situation where uh, a very close loved one, a spouse passed away, certainly suddenly, but also, if they were ill for a period of time and then passed,
yes,
you're dealing with
yes,
PTSD, aren't you?
yeah, yeah. And by the way, that's a very good point about, in terms of, again, people's passing. If they're prolonged sick, you know, there might have been a lot of changes going on in the relationship while they were sick.
Right.
You might have moved into, the person became more disabled. You might have moved into more of a caretaking role. It completely changed the dynamics, and so that kind of grief too goes on while the person is dying. Okay, and even if we go through that, you might even feel some relief when the person dies. Okay, not that it's Yahoo, the person is gone, but just the everyday burden for both of you is now lifted for a little while, and that's positive, really, because you've been probably grieving while the person was changing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. It's so
and
true.
so
And, and I
yeah,
just want to share with you, I brought up the PTSD thought because I know somebody. Um, met them just after their spouse suddenly passed away, and
Uh,
they couldn't even walk into a store. They couldn't even walk into a
yeah,
restaurant. And I kind of walked that journey with them to the point where now they were okay. Now they were going to a concert where they before couldn't even think of it. And that was at that point, that was a year after the spouse passed away suddenly.
yeah,
Um, and I know for them, they've improved, but it's that now we're a number of years later. It's still going to be more time for somebody to really
right, right.
process it.
But I like what you said. I was just standing side by side with them. Knowing that they were extremely traumatized, which is a significant loss, especially in a sudden way.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, but it's not a but. It's just that it takes a year, maybe to 2 years in general, to get through the acuity of it. And the important thing is that do you have a life to turn to? Okay, do you have friends and family that you can turn to? Which is
Mm,
a big deal with trauma anyway. Right? Is how do you establish safety and connection in your present life? Okay, that's one of the issues about recovering from any type of trauma.
it's a really, really great point that you bring up there, Barry. And yeah, we have a little bit of time left. Let's look at that. So it could be
Okay.
the loss of a relationship. It could be the loss of a loved one, maybe even a job. A loss of a job could play into that. But if that was your everything, the job
Yes.
was you. That's how you
Yes.
identified, excuse me, and people identify with you. Um, if your spouse was your everything, and when I say that, I mean you're lost without them. And same thing, a loss of
Yes.
a relationship where now you have that feeling of abandonment. To your point, it's almost as if you fell off the horse, but
That's right.
you don't have a horse to get back up on.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, and that is the truth. And in our culture, where we have, uh, especially with work, and not to mention relationships, where people that's all they do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and uh, and even if it's not exactly all they do, but if they're working, I'm just making this up, 60 hours a week, what else is there?
Right. That's your
Otherwise, you're
life.
pretty tired and exhausted. Yeah, that's your life.
Hmm.
So that change is very difficult and is a trauma in that sense. Okay, uh, and a spouse, quite frankly, there's a whole other issue you could bring up. Is that a lot of times, especially for men, they're not very well connected to other people and men in general, and so their spouse is really their connection a lot of times socially and emotionally. And so the trauma of that loss can be extreme. And then, who or what do they turn to, you know? Um, and then we get all kinds of different reactions to that too.
Right. And that is a challenge because in that point, it's like find another job, but it might not be the same type of job. Life
Right,
changes.
right.
It might be eventually get back into the dating world, but that's not,
Yes,
easy. That's going to take time. Um, and also your support system, the people around you that you can
right.
spend time with. Um, Such an
Yeah.
important topic, and I appreciate all your thoughts and your insight and compassion on this one today. Tough one,
Okay.
it really is.
Yeah, it is a
Um,
tough one. Yeah.
what's
Okay.
the best way if somebody's dealing with something and could use your help? Is it just your website, Barry Pilson,
Yeah. Yeah.
PhD?
BarryPilsonPhD.com, as we've talked about before. And, you can email me, or if you have any other issues, just contact me. That's fine.
Sure. You have such amazing insight, Barry, and I appreciate that. And I want to remind people Pilson, Barry, two R's,
Okay.
Barry Pilson, PhD.com. Thanks for being here today.
All right. Thank you, Steve. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
next week.
You
All
got it.
right.
We'll be
Bye
right
bye.
back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.